I feel that what is critical, absolutely critical, is getting your people equipped, trained. Now, I almost hesitate to use the word trained because that sounds formulaic. It sounds like, it is the very thing that we want people to develop an incarnational, relational understanding of evangelism, but it includes personal evangelism. It includes small group evangelism. It includes proclamation evangelism. Evangelism is a very big topic. What I have done and what I have encouraged, and I'll say more about this when we're together, one is I would every year, at least once a year, do evangelism equipping conferences. Get it into the DNA of the church. But all right, so you can do an evangelism training conference, but then you were saying, yeah, but what about a class? Or what about a workshop? I do that too, because you can only do so much. When I started doing evangelism training or conferences in America, you go Friday night, all day Saturday night, and then maybe Sunday afternoon. Those days are gone. I don't think that will ever happen again. I mean, maybe. But what you need to do, so you've only got limited time. I'm often given a Saturday now. So that's going to be less. But what can you do? Do workshops. So you can do a workshop on apologetics. You can do a workshop on going over again what is the gospel. Whatever their interests are, whatever their places where they say they need help, do smaller things throughout the year. But I'm going to talk about this in a more cohesive pattern in just a minute. But it is the bottom line I want you to get. Equipping is an absolute necessity. Now you could say, and it's absolutely true, but in the New Testament, you don't see a single evangelism conference. It's absolutely right. And why? Michael Green, the great evangelist, who's with the Lord now, whom I knew very, very well, and he said because they were so full of the Holy Spirit, they had seen the resurrected Christ. They didn't need it. They were able to do that. Those times are not our times. We live in very, very, very different time. And they need a lot of encouragement, a lot of help. It's not just the evangelism training. This needs to also be connected to what the pastor does and what the preaching, for instance, et cetera. But I'll talk about that in a minute, okay? But yes.
We'll stay back here and we'll move forward.
Okay.
I don't know who's asking, but...
Oh, let me just say, wait a minute. Let me just say one thing. And that is, I just want to say again, and I'm honestly, I'm not trying to plug my stuff. It's just that if you're interested in how to do an evangelism conference, one of the things you could do, now this is the notebook, or the what is it called, handbook, for people that are taking it. Then we videoed it. They had it filmed in London when we lived there. And they can do it in small groups. So, for instance, in this, I've got, first talk, inadequacy is compulsory. Second, the cross, the mess and the miracle. Thirdly, facing our fears. Fourth, it's all about relationships. 5, how do you cultivate curiosity? 6, the gospel, the content, the glory, the response. How do you become a Christian? 7, introducing the irresistible Jesus, one of the most powerful tools I have found, especially for people that are really new. They don't know, unbelievers, and I'll talk about this later. Teach your people how to do a seeker Bible study, and I'll talk about that later. But this is at least a tool where you could use it, you could have it in small groups, etc. Okay. Can you speak up just a little?
Yeah, just how do you best roll this out to your church, which was asked.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I guess, practically speaking, like at church, like for my church, for example, like you have people who have different gifts in the body.
Yeah.
So there are evangelist people, and then there are,
Right.
Finance, and all these things. I was just wondering, I'm a huge, obviously, we're all huge evangelists as church planners. Like, what is a reasonable expectation as one were to teach this to their church in all the ways that you prescribe, to expect a group of evangelists, that are going to be like this core team, and hopefully as they lead by example with the leadership, there'll be some trickle-down effect. But realistically, I'm just wondering if it is realistic, or like what is the expectation of like 10% of the congregation, 20% of the congregation actually owning this as their main spiritual gift and be on fire on this, like creating an evangelism team just as there is a worship creative arts team?
Really, really good question. And one of the things I want to make clear, my evangelism training is for the non-evangelist, which is most of Christians, and it's not that I'm saying you take this class and you're going to become an evangelist, you're going to become a professional evangelist. No. What is Jesus asking? That we are to go and make disciples. And what that means is we have to learn how to live, how to demonstrate, how to share the message. Evangelism is visual, it's verbal, and it's invitational. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So, do I want evangelists? The evangelists in the church are fantastic, and we want to encourage them, and they always come to the conferences. But what I'm looking for are the people that go, no, it's not my gift, and I don't know how, and I don't even know where to start. Those are the ones we're trying to help and to learn how to do it. Again, this is getting into the second one, but it's important to have both at the testimony time in church. When you have testimonies, have the evangelists in the church share what God is doing, but I can't tell you how important it is to have the non-evangelist give a testimony and say, I was absolutely scared to death. I didn't think I'd know what to say. I didn't know, and I didn't do it perfectly at all. Everybody's going to identify with them. They're going to, in a way, this is a little bit too strong, but they might write off the evangelist by saying, yeah, it's their gift. What we need to hear is from those who are trying, who have done it. Same with the pastor. Pastor needs to do that too. And then you also have to have people who became Christians. Well, I remember one time hearing a guy who was, he was so shy and so insecure as a Christian and, just felt he didn't do well at all. And the impact it had on his friend who then shared how he came to Christ. So we need, now percentages, I don't know. I really don't. I don't know. Do you know, Dick? I mean, because we've seen so many different examples of churches where it just popped and people realized, I can do this. That's probably the comment I hear the most when we're doing evangelism training. Oh my goodness, I can do this.
Becky, why don't we, since you are kind of toggling between like, oh, this is my next talk, why don't we hold these three questions, just move on into your next
That's a good idea.
And they can be adjusted.
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. Now this is going to be very different in that we're going to look at how can we create an evangelistic culture. Okay. And now I have some of this at the end of Stay Salt, my new book on evangelism, on particularly for the church, for pastors. Let me do the first point. And I'm talking about the church now. How are we going to get an evangelistic culture going in the church? And good. The clock is on. Good. It starts at the top. Now, I know you know this, but it really does start with you. It starts with the pastor. For a vision to infiltrate a church, it has to come from pastor and staff, where together you are working on how do we bring evangelism ministry into what we're doing. And so, for instance, particular ministries within the church, it is, I often find that there isn't an attempt to look at, all right, how do we're doing what we're doing, but how do we also have an evangelistic passion, evangelistic concern? So that if it's housing and you're wanting to do, how do we help the homeless, or whatever it is, or climate change? How do we, all right, we're really committed to that, but there's usually very little discussion about, and what is this relationship to the gospel? So what you want to do as pastor and staff, look at the various ministries and what's the role of evangelism along with what we're doing. Now let me say something to you as senior pastors, or whatever kind of pastor you are. You don't have to have the gift of the evangelist. So many times I've had ministers and rectors in England say to me, you know what, I love expositing the word, but I don't have the gift of the evangelist. You don't have to. But what you do need is you have to have vision for how to bring it to the church. You have to understand, okay, how am I going to be able to do this, to get a culture of evangelism? And that means you go to people who are maybe experts or specialists in the field of evangelism to be able to give you help. Now, when I say you don't have to be an evangelist, that doesn't mean you don't have to do evangelism. Now, I know how busy pastors are. I've seen it firsthand. But I cannot tell you the difference it will make in your church if you are involved with even one non-Christian and you're speaking to them and sharing the gospel. It makes such a difference in the way you will preach and the way you talk about evangelism. And when you're giving a testimony about an experience you've had sharing the gospel, you feel free to say, this is not my gift. It is absolutely, we are commanded to share the good news. We are commanded, and I want to do it. I'm just saying, this isn't my strong suit. And here's an example, and this is the places where I was afraid, and here is where God really helped me. You can't imagine how much that will help your people. Because they realize you are absolutely passionate about evangelism, but you're also honest about whether this happens to be in your gift package. Share from the pulpit. I've said use testimony and use it from people in your church. I've already said that. People in your church who can talk about not being an evangelist, but being passionate about learning how to share the good news. Give your story. The pastor gives his story. Let unbelievers give their story. Oh, that's also true. People who've been converted. But I have heard some pretty powerful stuff I have a friend and he's sharing Jesus Christ with me, and I don't know what I'm going to do, if I'm going to do it or not. But boy, let me tell you what I really, really have loved. He listens to me. He cares about me. And I feel heard. I feel seen. That can be very, very powerful. Sermon series for the pastor is really important. Do a couple of series, at least one in the year, where you're dealing with evangelism. And it could be how Jesus encounters people. What can we learn from Jesus and the way he engaged with people? How about... Saturday, I'm doing a mini evangelism training that, I don't know where it is. Where is it?
We're in Oakland.
So it's in Oakland. What's the church?
Storyline.
Okay, so that's where I'm going to be on Saturday. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about there is how do you talk about sin in a culture that doesn't believe in it? I'm not saying you race out and go talk about sin immediately. You can clear a room pretty quickly if you start there. But you need to be able to share and talk. You need to be able to talk about sin in a way people can hear. So I'm going to talk about, instead of immediately using the word sin, talk about God complex. And I'm going to say what I mean by that. Or, because God complex is rooted in the problem of unbelief. We get ourselves and God mixed up all the time. We think we run the show. Second thing, what is the second understanding? There's many lists of sins, but the Bible's interested in, again, going underneath. What is motivating sin? And so often it's unbelief and idolatry. And idolatry is worshiping the wrong thing. And it is amazing when I'm hoping I'm going to have time tomorrow. In fact, I will have time. I'm going to tell 2 stories. One was somebody who had a God complex, and then my gay hairdresser in London when I lived there for 7 years. We lived in different places in the UK, but I was very close to him. And one day I came in and he was so depressed. And I said, "What is the matter?" And he said, "I can't believe you actually looked into my face and saw I'm depressed. Nobody has looked." He said, "Becky, my partner has just left me, and I don't know what to do. I am beside myself." Now, we had talked for 7 years about faith. We knew each other well. But he said, I worshiped him. That was the clue. What's the problem? What's the deeper problem? The deeper problem is human fulfillment doesn't come by worshiping the wrong thing. And instead of talking about, well, no, I'm not going to. You can hear it on Saturday. I'll get going on the story. You know what to do it. All right, so there's some ideas. Starts at the top. Number 2, we need an effective strategy. Again, I hesitate to use the word strategy because it sounds formulaic. It sounds like it's a technique that you just haven't discovered yet. No. But what is an effective strategy? Number 1, we need to understand there are 3 aspects to personal evangelism. There are 3 aspects to evangelism. 1 is personal evangelism. 2 is small group evangelism. And 3 is proclamation outreach. Okay, personal evangelism. What did we see in the early church? They gossiped the gospel. Everywhere they went, you see them gossiping the gospel. They served their community in extraordinary ways and demonstrated love. And they called people to repent and put their trust in Jesus. 3 aspects of evangelism. What are they? Visual. You got to start with love. If we aren't taking time and getting to know people and loving people compassionately as we engage in spiritual conversations, it's visual. Secondly, it's verbal. The difficulty, love is so important, but guess what? Love isn't enough. They have to hear what is the good news. But how do we do it? How are we able to communicate the gospel in a way that people can hear? Thirdly, it's invitational. We invite people. Now, invitation is a process. The invitation may start with saying, let's go get a cup of coffee. But by the end of it, we also need to know, how would I lead somebody to Christ? How do I do it? Okay? Visual, verbal, invitational. Martin Lloyd-Jones, when he was talking about, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, and he was talking about the verbal and why that's so important. And he said, as important as love is, it's not enough. It's going to be what opens the door, but it's not enough. What we need is also to be able to communicate what this wonderful news is about. And then he said, justice without justification will always be inadequate. Great. But I met him when I was lived in the UK. Anyway, oh my gosh, what an amazing man. That's personal evangelism, small group evangelism. What is fascinating is how much you see evangelism happening in the early church. Of course, we know they worshiped in the home. But what we see is that they also reached out to people and shared the gospel and answered their questions and loved people by bringing them home. Michael Green has written a lot about this, about how the home was so important. Now, that people that were interested in Jesus could find out more. There are three things that tools that are very effective in small group. One, of course, is Alpha. Know Nikki Gumbel well. We did things together when we lived in the UK. We lived in Belfast for 3 years, Oxford for 3 years, 1 year in London, but traveled the whole of the UK and Europe in the 7 years we were there. Alpha is tremendous. Do you know Rico Tice? Do you know who that is? He's a very good friend, and he did Christianity Explored. Absolutely wonderful. But let me tell you the third that I don't think is as well known, I'm not sure, Seeker Bible Study. When you're dealing, it depends on the kind of unbeliever you're dealing with, but if you're dealing with somebody that really knows very, very little, I mean, they are just beginning, they are just starting, and they've got a relationship with you, and you've engaged in spiritual conversations. But what is going to be the next step beyond conversation? Get them reading the Gospels with you. I cannot tell you the power of Jesus. It is our greatest evangelistic tool, as it were. Get them reading it. Now, let me tell you, well, let me do the third, and then I want to tell you a story. Proclamation outreach. This is, I honestly don't have a way of measuring how much churches use proclamation outreach. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from you. But it is where we are proclaiming the gospel creatively with the right kind of music for that particular culture. And it can be, yes, it can be a big event like at Christmas and an Easter, but don't just limit it to that. It can be a proclamation, sharing of the gospel at a dinner party where you've got somebody that's very interested in art or very interested in sports or whatever. You can do it in so many different ways, but the idea of the proclamation outreach is that we're defending the gospel in the public square. I'm not talking about public square like it can be the big events that Billy did, but it can also be much, much smaller. When we lived in the UK, I guess we were there about the first year, and the head of the largest student ministry, it wasn't InterVarsity, but UCCF, and Richard Cunningham said to me, he said, Becky, he heard me speak several times, and he goes, you've had a year now to see how we do things, and I want to know, where do you think we're strong and where do you think we're weak? I said, where you're really strong is the third one, proclamation outreach. It is amazing what they do in the UK. In the student realm, they'll do a mission week. They do it for a whole week, or maybe 3 days. And they do proclamation outreaches in the church. It's both student and churches. They do it regularly. Well, in the church, it'd be more probably Easter and Christmas. And I said, you're much better than what I've seen in the States right now, in my experience. But I said, I tell you what's missing. You don't do any evangelism equipping to these students. So what happens at the proclamation outreaches? They don't invite their non-Christian friends because they don't have any. I said, what you need to do is get your students and your church equipped in evangelism. Secondly, they need to know Alpha and Christianity Explored, they're wonderful. But I said, what I would like to introduce here is the idea of a seeker Bible study where you are bringing your friends, a small group Bible study where the key in a good seeker Bible study, it's inductive. You always begin with Jesus. You can do other books, but I'd always start in the Gospels. You could do it one-on-one, but have 3 or 5 people. Here's the key: don't have the majority have to be unbelievers. You get Christians coming, and it's so difficult when there's too many Christians because we tend to use God talk and we give answers. They have to be trained themselves. I've done seeker Bible studies since I was in Spain. And my ground rule when I'm doing a seeker study, when a Christian says, oh, I really want to come, I really want to see what it's like, I go, you can come so long as you bring a non-Christian friend. You can't imagine how many that eliminates. So, and then I show them, this is the way that, what we're really trying to do. Richard said, that is, and I said to him, I knew Tim Keller pretty well, and Tim had done the proclamation outreach in both Oxford and Cambridge. I'm at Cambridge, and I've been doing the evangelism training to prepare for Tim. And I heard the Christian students talking afterwards, and they went, oh, Tim Keller is unbelievable. He is so fantastic. I wonder what the student group, I wonder what they're going to do next year in evangelism, because I can't wait to bring my Christian friends. I got all of my chapter, or whatever they call them in England. We used to call it IV chapters. I brought them all. They just loved it. And that's not Tim's fault. It's because they weren't getting training in evangelism. And how many times I've been to these events packed with Christians when we're supposed to bring our non-Christian friends. Rico Tice, oh, this is so moving. Rico said to me, well, wait a minute. I got to share Rico after I tell what happened. Richard Cunningham then said, okay, I want you and Dick to go. There's 7 regions in all the UK, and I want you to go and start doing evangelism training and seeker Bible study training. They already know proclamation events. They've got that. That's what I want you to do. So we went all over the UK, and we did it regionally. So many universities in a region would come, and we did the training. That first year, when students were taught not only an incarnational way of doing evangelism, and I don't mean that that's absent proclamation. I'm talking about holistic evangelism. But they also learned seeker Bible study. And they said to me, oh, Becky, you know what? This is such an interesting idea that we would say to our non-Christian friends, and we've got a relationship, and we've been sharing, the gospel and all that, of saying, I get the impression that maybe you've never read the Bible. That's right. Oh, especially, in UK and Europe. Well, you're so smart. You have such good questions. But how can you reject something that you've never investigated? I mean, for the sake of intellectual integrity, wouldn't you need to at least take a look? You don't have to believe in anything. Think of it like a book club, only the book is the Bible. No faith is required. But you got to at least take a look at what Jesus is like. And that is one thing, no matter how secular, people are interested in Jesus. They may not like the church, they may not like, Christianity at large. They're interested in Jesus. That first year that we went and did all the training, at the end of that year in the UK, 1,000 seeker Bible studies were started. And that they were registered. We think there may have even been more than that. And at that first year, they said they saw more people come to Christ than they had seen, and they couldn't remember when. And it got into the DNA. And pretty soon, it wasn't just proclamation events. Now it was personal evangelism training, small group. And this is what's so wonderful about small group. And that is, if you've got somebody that's really new, doesn't know anything, train your people how to lead a Bible study. A Bible study, inductive Bible study. I've done some of the seeker studies I have here. One's in Luke, one's in John. But after you do the study, then what? I think then they're ready for Alpha or Christianity Explored. Now, I'm not saying you can't start with Alpha and Christianity Explored too. But the thing is, what evangelism training is doing is that it is teaching individual Christians how to be confident and competent in their personal evangelism. And then when they bring a friend to see a video and listen to Nikki or Rico, they're much more confident in inviting somebody. But I would add it to your toolbox. It really, really is tremendously helpful. The other thing that happened in the UK is that it just all across the UK, they start doing all these seeker studies. Well, Europe and UK, it's so much smaller than America. News travels fast. Pretty soon, the European students were saying, what is going on in England and Wales? And we want this. So Dick and I were going all across with student ministry in Europe, doing the very same thing. And it was adding, even in Europe, they had the proclamation. They didn't have the personal and the small group, et cetera. We began then training Europe. Then guess what happened? And the child shall lead them. All the churches started saying, what is happening with our students? Our Christian students, families, parents were saying, they're so excited. They're so excited about Jesus. And you know what happens when you lead a seeker Bible study? You fall in love with Jesus all over again. He's so wonderful. He's so beautiful. And so then the churches started saying, we need help. Okay. Now, equipping is a necessity. So what do you do when you are equipping in small group or personal evangelism? There are several categories that you want to cover. One is motivation. How that they can personally be motivated and excited about evangelism. The difficulty is that so many see evangelism falsely. Like, what evangelism really is I've got to go and, offend a poor victim. I'm going to go and I'm going to preach, and they don't understand the beauty and what evangelism is, the visual, the verbal, the invitational. Secondly, you've got to see the model. Jesus and the way he does it is not just Jesus. What does the Bible show us about the model of how to go about this? Thirdly, the mission. The mission is that all Christians are called to profess and share their faith. The means, how do we lean on the power of the Holy Spirit? What are the supernatural resources? How can the Word of God help us? Fifthly, the message. How do you explain it? How do you defend it? Small group evangelism is also key. And you can train. I can do that in a Saturday morning. It really doesn't take as long as you would think to get people excited, motivated, but show them how and how not to do a seeker study. And Nikki and Rico have said the same thing. They've got very good training things for small group evangelism. And then the proclamation events. Okay, let me give you an example of a church, just one example of how they implemented it, and then I will take questions. All Souls Church is where John Stott, that was where he was for years and years. And the person that followed him was Hugh Palmer. And we know them very, very well. And Hugh said to me, to Dick and me, he said, I really want to look at London is a tough place. It is a culture that is unique. And one of the things is it's quite transient. People come and then they leave. And he said, I want to get together with the two of you and all my staff. And this is how it started. This would be point number one. And I want to look at, let's chart a vision for evangelism for at least a year, but hopefully beyond that. And he said, and so we met with the staff, we met with the whole team, and we developed an evangelism strategy together. Then, and that was probably in the spring of this 1 year. We developed it, and then in the fall, or autumn, as they say in the UK, Hugh said, we have a goal for this year. And one of the big questions that we talked about is, do we say evangelism? And Hugh said, I think I'm gonna do it a little different. We've tried many ways, but I'm gonna try this. And Hugh said, our intention this year, first and foremost, we want to fall in love with Jesus. Because when we fall in love with Jesus, we're much less intimidated about sharing the gospel. We know how beautiful and how wonderful he is. The gospel becomes more alive to us, and we become more interested in sharing the good news. The way we're going to do this is his idea, and it was really interesting. He said, Becky Pippert has written Seeker Bible Studies. Now, these are Bible studies on the Gospels that are used, that you can use with non-Christians, but you can do it with Christians. And so he said, we have a huge small group ministry here, and this year, what we're going to do is we're going to primarily focus on Luke and these studies that will help us fall in love with Jesus, and then help us be able, perhaps, later, maybe bring a friend to do the study with us. But he didn't emphasize that as much as we ourselves need to fall in love with Jesus. Then, people got involved in these small group Bible studies. Third thing he did, every Sunday for 7 or 8 weeks, I think, he would use one of the passages in the Seeker Bible Study on Luke, and he would preach from that passage and talk about the beauty of who Jesus was and all the different aspects of how Jesus related to people, etc. Then the second thing was that evening. Now, it turns out at All Souls, in the evening, more non-Christians come than they do in the morning. And so what they did in the evening is that they had, Rico would do this a lot, apologetic sermons on the same passage. But if, for instance, I was doing a passage where there was a miracle, then they would preach on, what about miracles? Are science and faith, are they in conflict? Well, what do you do with this whole supernatural thing? So they preached it apologetically. Now, all this was going on from September, October. There was also a tremendous prayer foundation that was happening for evangelism. In November, Dick and I came and we gave the conference. So they had read the Seeker Bible Study, they'd been hearing the sermons, etc. And so we came, and it was one of the largest conferences they had. But there was prayer and there was a strategy. Then after November, and by the grace of God, it went really, really well. Then now it was Christmas, and they did their annual outreach. But they had more people and more unbelievers coming because why? People had been trained, etc. People had been encouraged in their evangelism. So they did the Christmas outreach. Then after Christmas, I came and I did some training on Seeker Bible Study. And then the next goal was in January, let's start Seeker studies throughout the London community. And so they began doing that. The strategy, the prayer, the conference, the fruit was tremendous. And they began doing Seeker Bible studies throughout London. So that's it. How do you develop an evangelistic culture? That's at least a beginning.